To understand their future, they must look to the past. An ancient power is stirring, and a profound journey into the unknown is the only path forward. Come, see where the path leads. Like and subscribe to join the journey. The rain on the Isle of Skane was not like the rain of stories. It wasn't a cleansing torrent or a gentle pitter-patter. It was a constant, listless drizzle, the color of rust and regret, that seeped from the perpetual gray clouds of the undersky. It coated the cobblestones in a slick grime, dripped from the eaves of crooked houses, and tasted of ozone and decay. Skane was sinking, and the rain was the world weeping for it. Caelan felt the island's slow descent in his bones. He was a creature of this twilight realm, a low islander born under a dimming sky. Here, on the forgotten fringe of the floating archipelago of Ethelgard, life was measured by the faint, pulsing glow of the isle's central Ethereum crystal. And Skane's crystal was dying. Its once brilliant sapphire light had faded to a bruised violet, a weak heartbeat that could no longer defy the pull of the roiling cloud sea far below. The island's magical buoyancy waned with each passing cycle, a slow, inexorable surrender. This fading magic was the source of Caelan's otherness. In a world where status, worth, and even one's name were defined by the ability to draw from the Ethereum, to weave its light into tangible power, Caelan was an anomaly. He was hueless. Born without the innate connection, he was a blank space in a vibrant tapestry, a discordant note in the grand symphony of magic. The other children had taunted him with the name Unhued, and it had stuck, a brand of his inadequacy. This wound from his past had festered into a lie he carried in the marrow of his being, that he was worthless without the magic his society prized above all else. To compensate, Caelan had turned his back on the magical world that had rejected him. He found solace not in the ethereal glow of aether tech, but in the solid, predictable world of mechanics. His small workshop, tucked away in a forgotten alley, was a chaotic sanctuary of brass gears, copper wire, and ticking clockwork devices scavenged from the island's rubbish heaps, while others practiced weaving light into shields or warming their homes with glowing orbs. Caelan coaxed life back into broken things. He could diagnose a faulty escapement by its stuttering tick, or recalibrate the pressure gauge with a feather-light touch. His hands, stained with grease and marked by tiny cuts, were more comfortable with a wrench than a focusing crystal. He was a relic in a magical age, his skills a throwback to a time before the Isles took to the sky. His current obsession was a small bird-like automaton. Its wings were a delicate lattice of brass filigree, its eyes tiny, polished obsidian beads. It was pre-Ethereum, a masterpiece of pure mechanics. For weeks, he had painstakingly cleaned its gears and replaced its mainspring, driven by a desperate need to prove that ingenuity could rival magic, that something beautiful could be born from logic and metal, not just light and will. Still wrestling with that metal pigeon, a voice rasped from the doorway. Caelan didn't look up. "It's a kinetic marvel, Ilara, not a pigeon." Ilara entered, a stooped figure wrapped in a catched wool cloak that did little to ward off the damp chill. She was the Isle's disgraced historian, another outcast who found kinship with a hueless boy. Her crime had been to study the heretical texts of the world before, the history of the solid ground that now existed only in myth. She leaned her walking stick against a workbench, her gaze falling on the automaton. "A marvel that doesn't fly." "It will," Caelan muttered, making a minute adjustment to a wing joint with a pair of tweezers. His motivation was intensely personal. If he could make this flightless thing soar, perhaps he too could writhe about his station. Ilara sighed, her breath misting in the cool air. "The elders are meeting again. The tremors are getting worse. The crystal, it flickered twice this morning." Caelan's hands stilled. Everyone on Skane knew what the tremors meant. The island's structural integrity was failing as its ethereal field weakened. Soon, the fissures would be too great to mend, and their small, forgotten world would break apart and tumble into the endless churning abyss of the cloud sea. The conflict was not with some distant enemy, but with the very nature of their world, a battle against a slow, inevitable decay. He placed the tweezers down, the familiar bitterness rising in his throat. He was a tinkerer on a dying rock, a boy trying to fix a clock while the mountain at Savon crumbled into the sea.
2 days later, the news arrived. It came not by messenger skiff, which no longer wasted Ethereum on trips to the lower isles, but via a crackling voxcaster in the center of the town square. The device, an artifact of a more prosperous time, sputtered to life, and the amplified voice of Lord Regent Valerius boomed across the rain-slicked stones, sharp and clear as cut glass. Valerius ruled from the high spire, the celestial crown of Ethelgard, an island that floated so high it was bathed in perpetual sunlight, untouched by the gloom of the undersky. He was the most powerful aether weaver of his generation, a man whose very presence was said to make the air hum with energy. His portrait, displayed even in the dreary halls of Skane's council chambers, showed a man with severe patrician features and eyes that held the cold, unwavering light of a distant star. People of Ethelgard. His voice resonated, devoid of warmth, but filled with an unshakable authority. For generations, we have lived upon the grace of the Ethereum. It has lifted us from the mire of the world below and gifted us the sky. But that gift is fading. Across the archipelago, the great crystals weaken. Our world faces an unprecedented crisis. A nervous murmur rippled through the small crowd, huddled under umbrellas and dripping awnings. They knew this proof intimately. They lived it, breathed it, felt it in the Iwin's groaning foundations. Hard decisions are required for the survival of our civilization, Valerius continued. Sacrifice is necessary. Therefore, by the authority vested in me as Lord Regent, I announce the great consolidation. The political weight of his words was immense. His power was absolute, and this decree was about to reshape their world. The remaining Ethereum from the Outer Isles will be gathered and brought to the High Spire. We will consolidate our power, our people, and our future into a single unassailable bastion. The heart of our culture will be preserved. The High Spire will endure as a testament to our strength and will. A cold dread, colder than the endless rain, settled over Kalen. He understood the unspoken implication. Consolidation. It was a clean, clinical word for abandonment. As if hearing his thoughts, Valerius's voice turned solemn, a carefully crafted performance of regret. To the noble people of the Lower Isles, your sacrifice will be remembered. You will give our civilization the time it needs to find a new solution to restore our power. Your memory will be enshrined in the annals of the High Spire. You are the foundation upon which our future will be built. The transmission ended with a burst of static, leading profound, echoing silence in the square. The Lord Regent had not presented himself as a cackling villain, but as the hero of his own story, a leader making a terrible but necessary choice for the greater good. His motivation was, from his lofty perspective, understandable. Save the best of their world by cutting away the dying arts. To those on the High Spire, it was logic. To the people of Skane, it was a death sentence. The silence broke. A woman began to sob quietly. An old man cursed, his voice thick with impotent rage. They were being left to die, their lives deemed less valuable than those basking in the sun above. The social hierarchy of Ethelgard had never been more brutally clear. The higher you floated, the more your life was worth. This was the inciting incident, the final push that shattered their fragile world. For Kalen, the abstract fear of the island's decay had just become a concrete government-sanctioned execution. Valerius's decree was not just a political maneuver, it was a declaration that Kalen and everyone he had ever known was expendable. Desperation was a catalyst. It burned away the lethargy of despair and left behind the sharp, crystalline structure of purpose. The Lord Regent's decree had given the people of Skane a death sentence, but for Caelan, it was a call to arms. He would not let his home, his world, be erased as a footnote in Valerius's glorious history. He found Ilara in her sanctuary, a cramped room at the back of the Isle's library, filled with teetering stacks of scrolls and forbidden tomes. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a scent Caelan found more comforting than the ozone tang of magic. Ilara was hunched over a large frayed map, tracing its faded lines with a gnarled finger. She looked up as he entered. Her eyes, usually clouded with the melancholy of a forgotten past, now held a feverish glint. "He's a fool, Caelan," she said, her voice a low hiss. "A powerful fool, but a fool nonetheless. He thinks the crystals are the source. He's been staring at the candle flame for so long he's forgotten about the fire." Caelan's heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you mean?" Ilara beckoned him closer, tapping a point on the map. It was a crude, ancient rendering of Ethelgard, but it showed something no modern chart did. A landmass below the Clad Sea, a vast continent labeled simply the Foundation. The official history, the one Valerius champions, tells us that our ancestors were gifted the Ethereum crystals by the sky itself, she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That we ascended to escape a primitive, savage world. It's a lie. A convenient myth to justify their power. She pulled a slim, leather-bound book from a precarious stack. Its cover was bare, its pages brittle. This is a text from the time of the Ascension. It speaks of the Ethereum crystals not as a source of power, but as batteries, as conduits. She opened the book to a marked page. The script was archaic, but Caelan could make out a key phrase, repeated like a prayer. Core Ethereum. The Ethereum heart, Ilara translated, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. A central power source, a nexus of immense energy. Our ancestors didn't discover the crystals. They built them to draw power from the heart. They drained the world below to lift their cities into the sky. And according to this, the heart was hidden away after the Ascension, in a place they called the Sunken Temple, to prevent its power from ever being misused. This was the mystery at the core of their existence, a truth that could unravel the very fabric of their society. The floating isles, their entire civilization, were built on a stolen power and a historical lie. If the heart exists, Caelan breathed, the scale of the idea staggering him. It could be used to recharge the crystals. All of them, not just the High Spire. Exactly, Ilara affirmed. It could save us. But the temple is on the Foundation in the world below, a place no one has seen in 1,000 years, a place our histories now call uninhabitable, a wasteland. This was it. Not a vague hope, but a tangible objective, a quest. The legend of the Ethereum heart was a direct challenge to Valerius's authority and a path to salvation for the Forgotten Isles. It was their call to adventure, a whisper of a legend against the roar of a tyrant's decree. Why hasn't anyone else found this? Caelan asked, his mind racing. Because Valerius and his predecessors had to systematically destroy any text that contradicts their version of history. They call it heresy, Ilara said, a bitter smile touching her lips. I was the keeper of annals on the High Spire once. I was exiled for asking these very questions. They cast me down here to be forgotten, along with the truth. Her status as a disgraced mentor was what made her the perfect and only person to hold this knowledge. She looked at Caelan, her gaze intense. They would never look for a seclusion in the past they worked so hard to bury. And no Ethereum weaver would ever believe the answer lies in a world they consider beneath them. She paused, her eyes falling on his grease-stained hands. But you are different. You don't think like they do.
The implication hung in the dusty air between them. A quest to the mythical world below to find a lost artifact from a forgotten age. It was insane, it was impossible, and it was their only hope.
The hope Alara had ignited in Kaelin's chest guttered like a cheap candle in a gale. A quest to the world below? It was a child's fantasy. They were trapped on a sinking rock, thousands of fathoms above a mythical landmass, with the Lord Regent's forces undoubtedly monitoring any unauthorized travel. "It's impossible, Alara," he said, pacing the small workshop. The automaton bird sat silently on his workbench, its mechanical eyes seeming to mock his own flightlessness. "We have no ship, no pilot, no way to even survive the passage through the cloud sea. It's a storm of raw energy that would tear a longboat to splinters." This was his refusal of the call, a pragmatic surrender to the overwhelming odds. "The Aetherweavers think in terms of power," Ilara countered, her voice firm. "You think in terms of mechanics. That is why you are the only one who can do this. The old texts speak of the cloud sea disrupting etheric fields. A modern skiff, powered by focused aetherium, would be torn apart or lose power. But an older vessel, one with a hybrid engine, one that relies on combustion and mechanics as much as magic, it might survive." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You are not worthless because you are hueless, Kaelin. You are valuable because of it. Your mind sees solutions they are blind to." Her words struck a chord deep within him, chipping away at the lie he had believed for so long. He wasn't being asked to weave light or command magic. He was being asked to think, to build, to solve a problem. It was the first time anyone had suggested his perceived weakness was, in fact, a strength. But the problem of a ship remained. There was only one vessel on Skane capable of such a journey, and its captain was even more broken down and unreliable than his ship. They found Reese in the island's only tavern, the Leaky Mug, nursing a glass of amber liquid that smelled suspiciously like engine coolant. Reese was a smuggler by trade and a debtor by circumstance, a man whose cynicism was as legendary as his piloting skills. He was tall and wiry, with a perpetually unshaven jaw and a smirk that never quite reached his tired eyes. His past was a tapestry of bad deals and grudges, the most prominent of which was against Lord Regent Valerius, who had seized his last profitable cargo shipment on a whim. His airship, the Vagrant, was a rust bucket of a vessel, a relic from a bygone era. It was a chimera of wood, brass, and iron, its primary lift generated by a tattered, gas-filled envelope, but its propulsion came from a temperamental clockwork combustion engine that only Reese seemed to understand. Kaelin laid out the plan, his voice low and urgent. Reese listened, one eyebrow arched in amusement, taking slow sips from his glass. When Kaelin finished, the pilot let out a short, harsh laugh. "A mythical heart and a sunken temple on a fairy tale continent?" Reese scoffed. "Kid, you've been breathing too much of Alara's book dust. I don't fly charity missions, and I certainly don't fly suicide runs." "The temple is said to hold treasures from the old world," Alara interjected smoothly, playing the one card she knew might work. "Gold, artifacts, things of great value to a man in your financial situation." Reese's smirk faltered. He swirled the liquid in his glass, his gaze distant. The allure of treasure was strong, but it was Kaelin's final plea that sealed the deal. "Valerius is the one leaving us here to die," Kaelin said, his voice quiet but intense. "This is a chance to spit in his eye, a chance to prove him wrong." The mention of Valerius's name hardened Reese's expression. The grudge was a powerful motivator. He looked from Alara's desperate hope to Kaelin's determined fire. He was a sidekick born of necessity, his own selfish motivations aligning, for now, with their noble quest. "Fine," Reese sighed, draining his glass. "I'll take you. But you," he said, pointing a grimy finger at Kaelin, "are on engine duty. That old girl is going to need constant nursing. And Ilara, if there is no treasure, you're scrubbing the decks for the rest of your life."
He stood, tossing a few coins on the table. "Get your things. We leave at twilight, before the morning patrol from the High Spire gets any ideas." As they walked towards the docking spire where the vagrant was moored, Kalen felt a terrifying, exhilarating lightness. He was leaving his ordinary world, his sinking home, and venturing into the complete unknown. He was crossing the first threshold, not as a hero of legend, but as a huge boy with a disgraced historian and a cynical smuggler aboard a flying heap of junk, chasing a whisper of a myth. It was a fool's errand, and it was the only thing left to do.
The cloud sea was not the sea of water. It was a roiling, chaotic expanse of energy and vapor, a permanent storm that separated the sky world of Aethelgard from the forgotten foundation below. To descend into it was to fly into the heart of a thunderstorm that had raged for a millennium. Aboard the Vagrant, the journey was a violent symphony of groaning wood and screaming metal. The ship bucked and plunged, tossed about by unseen currents. Lightning, thick and purple, spiderwebbed across the viewport, illuminating monstrous, churning cloud formations. The aether-powered instruments on the bridge flickered erratically before dying with a pathetic whine, their magical energies overwhelmed by the raw chaos outside. "Told you they'd be useless," Reese yelled over the roar of the engine, his knuckles white as he wrestled with the ship's wheel. "It's all up to you now, kid." Kalen was in the engine room, a hot, cramped space that smelled of oil and hot metal. He moved with a focused grace, his hands a blur as he monitored pressure gauges, adjusted fuel lines, and manually cooled overheating pistons. Here, in the mechanical heart of the ship, he was in his element. The chaos outside was irrelevant. All that mattered were the rhythms of the machine, the steady thump, thump, thump of the pistons that was their only lifeline. This was a pure test of their adaptability, a battle of person versus nature, where magic was a liability, not an asset. For what felt like an eternity, they fell. Then, with a final, gut-wrenching lurch, they broke through. The violence ceased, replaced by an unnerving calm. The roar of the storm faded to a distant murmur above them. Kalen stumbled to the bridge, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. He looked out the viewport and gasped. They had emerged into a world of perpetual twilight. Above them, the cloud sea was a churning, incandescent ceiling. Below them stretched a landscape unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was a desert, but the sand was not sand. It was a vast, undulating sea of fine black grit that shimmered like polished glass. The dunes rolled towards the horizon, their surfaces catching the dim light from above, creating shifting patterns of silver and shadow. This was the shifting sands dunes of Alara's ancient naps, a great expanse that hid the secrets of a lost world. "Welcome to the Foundation," Alara whispered, her face pressed against the glass, her expression a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The world our ancestors abandoned." Reese let out a low whistle. "No treasure down here, just a lot of nothing." He tapped a dead gauge on the console. "And we're flying blind. No maps, no instruments, just old-fashioned navigation." "The stars," Kalen said, pointing upwards. Through gaps in the cloud sea, faint pinpricks of light were visible. "The old charts are celestial. If we can find the right constellations, we can find our way." Reese shot him a look of grudging respect. "A tinkerer and an astronomer. Maybe we won't die after all." The descent had fundamentally altered their dynamic. In the sky world, Kalen was the liability. Here, in a world where aetheric magic failed, his knowledge of mechanics and his logical mind had become their most valuable asset. The rules had changed, and for the first time, Kalen felt the stirrings of a confidence he had never known. Navigating by the faint, unfamiliar stars was a slow and arduous process. For days, they flew over the endless, silent expanse of the glass desert. The landscape was mesmerizing, but unnervingly empty, a void that seemed to swallow sound and hope. Their water supplies were dwindling, and the ship's engine was beginning to show the strain of the descent. It was Ilara who spotted it first, a dark line on the horizon, a smudge against the shimmering dunes. As they drew closer, it resolved into an impossible sight, a forest. The trees were not made of wood. They were crystalline, their trunks and branches formed from a translucent, milky white material that seemed to drink the dim light. They rose from a patch of dark, fertile soil, an oasis of impossible life in the sterile desert. As the vagrant drifted closer, a low, melodic hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to resonate deep in their chests. The whispering pines, Ilara breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. The ancient texts had described them, but she had assumed it was poetic license. A place of natural, primal magic, nothing to do with the Ethereum. They landed the ship at the edge of the crystalline woods and ventured in. The air within the forest was cool and still. The humming was louder here, a complex harmony of shifting tones. It was a form of magic unlike anything they knew, more akin to the vibration-based sorcery of myth than the controlled weaving of etheric light. As they walked deeper, the forest began to play tricks on them. The path would twist back on itself, leading them in circles. Shimmering illusions flickered at the edge of their vision. A glimpse of the sunlit towers of the High Spire, the sound of rain on Skane's cobblestones, the face of a long-lost loved one. It's a labyrinth, Kalen realized, his voice tight. It's projecting our own thoughts, our fears and desires. This was a classic stage of any great quest, a trial that tested not their physical strength, but their inner resolve. Reese was tormented by visions of his creditors and the mocking face of Valerius. Ilara was haunted by the jeering scholars who had exiled her. Kalen saw his own reflection, but with eyes that glowed with etheric power, the version of himself he had always yearned to be, whispering that he should abandon this foolish quest and accept his place. It was Ilara who found the solution. The text said the pines respond to emotion, to intent, she said, her voice strained. We must not fight it, we must guide it. Focus not on what we fear, but on what we seek, a single, unified purpose. They stood back to back, a small, defiant island in the sea of illusions. Closing their eyes, they focused their minds on a single image, the sunken temple, the Ethereum heart. The disorienting visions wavered. The humming of the pines shifted from a chaotic cacophony to a single, pure note. When they opened their eyes, the illusory paths had vanished. Before them stood a single, straight path leading through the heart of the forest. They had passed the test. The journey through the whispering pines had been more than a simple navigation challenge. It had forced them to confront their internal demons and solidify their shared purpose. It was also a profound revelation. Magic existed here, wild and untamed, completely separate from the Ethereum. The Sky Dweller's understanding of the world, their entire system of belief, was not just incomplete, it was fundamentally wrong. The path through the whispering pines led them to the base of a great black mesa. Carved into its sheer rock face were the remnants of a city, a sight that made Kalen's breath catch in his throat. It was a city of gears and pistons, of copper pipes and intricate clockwork mechanisms on a scale he could barely comprehend. Towers were supported by massive, articulated legs, and bridges were complex webs of interlocking cogs. It was a forgotten ruin, a testament to a technology lost to time and shrouded in mystery. As they explored the silent, dust-choked streets, they found them populated by motionless figures. Humanoid automatons, crafted from bronze and iron, frozen in the midst of their daily lives. A clockwork street sweeper stood with its brim poised. A mechanical vendor's arms were outstretched over an empty stall.
A family of automatons sat around a metal table, their heads bowed. "The clockwork ghosts," Elora whispered, consulting a tattered scroll. "The builders of this city." The text claimed they were powered by the world's inner heat, by geothermal energy. Kalen approached one of the figures, a tall, elegant automaton with delicate, articulated fingers. He ran his hand over its cold metal shell, his mind reeling. This was not the crude, simple mechanics he was used to. This was artistry, engineering elevated to a form of genius. He found a panel on its back, a complex series of tumblers and gears. To Reese and Elora, it was an indecipherable mess. To Kalen, it was a language he instinctively understood. His fingers moved with a life of their own, turning dials, aligning gears, feeling the faint clicks of connection. There was a soft whirring sound, and a dim orange light began to glow from within the automaton's chest. Its head swiveled, and its optical lenses, like camera shutters, clicked open to focus on him. A wave of awe and terror washed over the group. Kalen had reactivated it. His unique skills, honed in a lonely workshop on a sinking isle, were the key to unlocking this lost civilization. This was his outsider's advantage made manifest. His supposed flaw was the very thing that allowed him to commune with the past. The automaton, which Alara identified from its chest plate as a lore master, did not speak. Instead, it led them to the city's central plaza. There, it and other reactivated automatons performed a silent mechanical ballet. Using focused beams of light projected from their fingertips, they created a series of images on the plaza wall, a pictographic history of their people. They showed a thriving, vibrant society, living in harmony with the land. They depicted the construction of the Aetherium Heart, a colossal geo-engine designed to regulate the planet's energy. Then the images turned dark. They showed the ancestors of the Sky Dwellers, the Aether Weavers, seizing the heart. They showed them building the great crystals to drain its power, siphoning the world's lifeblood to lift their isles into the sky. The final images were of the clockwork civilization slowly dying as the planet's geothermal energy faded, their city grinding to a halt, leaving them frozen as silent monuments to a forgotten genocide. The revelation was staggering. The Sky Dwellers were not inheritors, they were conquerors. Their magical society was built on the ruins of this magnificent mechanical one. The conflict with Valerius was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a quest for justice, a chance to atone for an ancient, unforgivable crime. The weight of this new knowledge settled upon Kalen, transforming him from a boy trying to save his home into the unwilling heir of a terrible truth.
Lord Regent Valerius was not a man who tolerated loose ends. From his sunlit throne room in the high spire, he had monitored the descent of the vagrant with cold, calculating fury. It was an act of rebellion, a challenge to his absolute authority, and it could not be allowed to stand. He did not wait for the heroes to reach their goal. He was an active, adaptable antagonist, determined to crush any threat before it could fester. He dispatched his most formidable agent, Commander Lyra, the secondary villain to his grand scheme, a woman whose loyalty was as sharp and unbending as the shards of light she could weave into weapons. Lyra and her elite squadron of Aether Weavers, the Crimson Guard, descended on specialized, high-speed skiffs, their etheric engines shielded by experimental technology that allowed them to briefly withstand the turbulence of the Cloud Sea. The attack came without warning, as Kalen and the others were absorbing the horrifying history revealed by the clockwork ghosts. The twilight sky was split by the whine of approaching engines. 3 sleek crimson skiffs landed in the plaza, and Lyra stepped out, her armor glowing with contained power. She was the embodiment of a High Spire's might, arrogant, beautiful, and utterly ruthless. "By the authority of the Lord Regent, you are under arrest for treason," she announced,
her voice ringing with contempt as she surveyed the primitive ruins. "Surrender the hueless boy and the historian. The smuggler will be executed for his troubles." Reese cursed and drew a heavy, grease-stained pistol. "Try it." A chaotic battle erupted in the silent city. The Crimson Guard were devastatingly effective, launching bolts of pure energy that blasted chunks from the clockwork buildings. Alara created a shimmering shield of light, but it buckled under their focused assault. They were outmatched and outgunned. The conflict shifted into a desperate game of evasion and pursuit. "This way," Kalen yelled, leading them into the labyrinthine streets of the city. Here, the battle turned. The Aether Weavers were powerful, but their tactics were designed for open skies, not the tight, complex confines of a mechanical city. Kalen, however, understood the city's logic. He saw it not as a collection of buildings, but as a single, interconnected machine. While Reese laid down covering fire and Alara used her limited energy to create diversions, Kalen darted from one control panel to another. He triggered a massive piston to slam down, blocking a street. He rerouted steam through a series of pipes, creating a thick, blinding fog. He activated a row of dormant street sweepers, sending them clanking and whirring towards the guards, a clumsy but effective distraction. The final confrontation took place on a massive, geared bridge. As Lyra cornered them, Kalen found the bridge's master control console. With a desperate gamble, he threw a heavy wrench into the primary gear mechanism. With a deafening screech of protesting metal, the bridge began to retract, splitting in two. Lyra and her guards were forced to retreat to their skiffs as Palin, Reese, and Alara scrambled to safety on the other side. They had escaped, but just barely. Panting, they watched the crimson skiffs ascend and vanish back into the clouds. Kalen's heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a wild, fierce exhilaration. He had faced a best of a high spire, the pinnacle of etheric power, and he had outsmarted them. He hadn't used a single spark of magic. He had used his mind, his knowledge of machines, and a well-aimed wrench. It was a victory that solidified the central theme of his journey. Wit and ingenuity are a power all their own.
Their escape had come at a cost. The Vagrant was damaged, and Lyra's forces would surely return. Their time was running out. Guided by the Lore Master Automaton, they made their way to their final destination on the Foundation, a colossal observatory built into the heart of a jagged mountain. The entrance was sealed by a massive circular door, a complex lock of concentric, rotating rings covered in strange glyphs. It was another mechanical puzzle, one that had kept the secrets of the observatory safe for 1,000 years. While Ilara worked to decipher the glyphs, cross-referencing them with her scrolls, Kalen examined the mechanism itself. He saw the patterns, the counterweights, the hidden release triggers. It was a collaboration of mind and matter, of historical knowledge and mechanical instinct. Together, they opened the door, and it swung inward with a groan of ancient metal. The interior of the observatory was a breathtaking sight. The vast, cavernous chamber was dominated by a single immense structure, a celestial orrery. But instead of planets and moons, this orrery was a three-dimensional map of the world's geothermal energy flows. A web of glowing crystalline lines that pulsed with a soft inner light. At its center was a large, empty space. "This isn't a star chart," Ilara breathed, her voice filled with reverence. "It's a geochart, a map of the planet's lifeblood." The Lore Master Automaton pointed a slender metal finger towards a control console at the base of the orrery. It was another complex puzzle, a series of levers, dials, and lenses that needed to be aligned in a precise sequence. This was the final test before the climax, the approach to the inmost cave. This puzzle was Kalen's alone to solve. It was a machine of unimaginable complexity, and only his intuitive understanding of mechanics could unravel it. For hours he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration.
He traced the energy lines of the orrery, cross-referencing them with the settings on the console. Reese stood guard at the entrance, his pistol ready, while Elara offered quiet encouragement, translating the occasional glyph on the console that hinted at its function. It was a task that required all of his skills, his logical mind, his steady hands, his ability to see the whole system, not just its individual parts. Finally, with a soft click, the last tumbler fell into place. The orrery whirred to life, the glowing lines brightened, and beams of light shot from various points, converging on the empty space at the center. There, a shimmering holographic image formed. It was a towering crystalline spire, pulsing with immense power, located deep within the planet's core. The Crystal Spire, Elara whispered, naming the location from her texts. The housing for the Ethereum heart. The hologram shifted, revealing a hidden entrance at the base of the spire, a pathway into the very heart of the world. They now had their destination. They had the key. A final stage of their quest was at hand.
The entrance to the crystal spire was a shimmering fissure at the bottom of a deep geothermal vent, a wound in the world's crust. Leaving the vagrant behind, they descended into the planet's core, the air growing thick with energy and the oppressive weight of the world above. They emerged into a space that defied logic. They stood at the entrance to a vast, crystalline labyrinth, its walls, floor, and ceiling made of the same pulsating, semi-translucent material as the spire itself. The corridors twisted in impossible angles, glowing with a raw, chaotic energy that made the air crackle. This was the world's final defense mechanism. As they stepped inside, Elara cried out, clutching her head. The Ethereum. I can't control it here. The raw magic is too strong. It's disrupting my ability to weave. The labyrinth was a great equalizer. It neutralized the Sky Dwellers' greatest advantage, rendering their refined etheric magic unstable and dangerous. In this final climactic environment, power was a liability. Survival depended on instinct and intellect. They pressed on, navigating the shifting, treacherous corridors. The labyrinth was alive, its walls reconfiguring around them, trying to trap and confuse them. They relied on Reese's sharp instincts, honed by years of navigating asteroid fields and blockades, and on Kalen's logical mind. Kalen noticed subtle patterns in the labyrinth's shifts, a rhythm to its madness, and used it to guide them forward. This was their final ordeal, the ultimate test before the reward. After what felt like days, they reached the center of the labyrinth. It opened into a colossal cavern, and in its heart, suspended by fields of raw power, was the Ethereum heart. It was a sight of terrible, beautiful power. A crystal the size of a mountain, its facets impossibly complex, pulsed with the light of a capitate sun. Integrated into its base was a massive clockwork mechanism, a series of colossal gears and regulators built by the clockwork ghosts to control its immense output. But they were not alone. Waiting for them, standing before the heart as if he owned it, was Lord Regent Valerius. Beside him stood Commander Lyra, her crimson armor glowing ominously in the pulsating light. I must confess, I am impressed, Valerius said, his voice calm and resonant, betraying no surprise. He held up a small, intricate compass, its needle glowing brightly, a clever little artifact. The relic that tracks large-scale etheric disturbances. It led us right to you. The chase was over. The final confrontation was at hand. You cannot possibly comprehend what you have stumbled upon, Valerius said, his arms spread wide, a gesture that encompassed the entire cavern. He was no longer the distant politician. He was a zealot in the presence of his god. You see this as a battery to be used. I see it as a throne. His full plan, his ultimate ambition, was laid bare. He didn't want to simply recharge the high spire. He wanted to merge with the Ethereum heart, to absorb its limitless power and ascend to true godhood. He believed that only through his absolute divine rule could humanity be truly saved from its own weakness. He was the ultimate expression of his society's obsession with power, the dark mirror of what Kalen could have become if he had ever gained the magic he once craved. "The world is broken," Valerius declared, his eyes burning with fanatical light. "I will remake it. I will forge a new Ethelgard, one of order, strength, and singular purpose. My purpose." "He'll kill everyone," Kalen said, his voice steady despite the thunderous beating of his own heart. Valerius smiled, a thin, pitying expression. "A necessary price for perfection." He gave a curt nod to Lyra. "Deal with them." The final battle began. Rhys and Lyra clashed in a brutal flurry of motion, the Sluggler's cunning and brute force against the commander's elegant, deadly light weaving. Elora, her own magic unreliable, used her knowledge of etheric principles to shout warnings and point out weaknesses in Lyra's technique, supporting Rhys from the sidelines. But Kalen ignored the fight. He knew he could never face Valerius in a duel of power. The Lord Regent was already drawing energy from the heart, his body beginning to shimmer with an unbearable light. To fight him directly was suicide. Instead, Kalen's eyes were fixed on the colossal clockwork mechanism at the base of the heart. He saw the regulators, the conduits, the overflow channels. While Valerius was a master of the Ethereum, he was ignorant of the very machine that controlled it. He saw only the power, not the science that underpinned it. This was Kalen's battlefield. He sprinted towards the control console, dodging a casual blast of energy from Valerius that shattered the crystalline floor where he had just stood. His mind worked with a speed and clarity he had never known. He was no longer just a tinkerer. He was a master engineer, seeing the entire system as a single, elegant equation. He didn't try to shut the heart down. He did the opposite. With deft movements, he began to disengage the safety protocols, overriding the ancient regulators. He rerouted the primary energy flow, bypassing the conduits that fed the floating isles and channeling the heart's full, raw, untamed power directly towards the spot where Valerius stood. Valerius laughed, believing Kalen was foolishly trying to attack him. He opened himself to the torrent of energy, ready to absorb it to complete his apotheosis. But the power of the Ethereum heart was not meant to be contained within a mortal form, even one as powerful as his. It was the raw, creative, and destructive force of a planet's core. The light grew, from brilliant to blinding. Valerius's triumphant laughter turned into a scream of agony as his body was overwhelmed, unable to process the infinite power he had so greedily coveted. He was defeated not by a superior force, but by his own arrogance, consumed by the very power he sought to control. With a final, silent flash that bleached all color from the cavern, he was gone. Kalen's victory was not one of magic or might. It was a triumph of intellect, of understanding, of seeing the pieces of the puzzle that the most powerful man in the world had been blind to. He had won by playing his own game, and in doing so, had proven the worth of his own unique mind, finally and completely silencing the lie that had haunted him his entire life. With Valerius's disintegration, the chaotic energy in the cavern stabilized. Lyra, her face a mask of shock and disbelief at her master's fall, was swiftly subdued by Rhys. The battle was over. Kalen stood before the control console of the Ethereum heart. The reward for his ordeal was absolute, control over the fate of his world. The power that had pulsed chaotically was now his to command. 3 choices lay before him. He could channel the heart's energy directly into Skane's dying crystal, lifting his home into the sunlit skies, saving his people at the expense of all others. It was the choice Valerius would have made, a selfish act born of a narrow loyalty. It was the choice the bitter, outcast boy he used to be would have made. He could restore the power to the high spire, preserving the old order, maintaining the system of inequality that had cast him out but had been the only world most people had ever known. It would be the safe, conservative choice. But Caelan was no longer the person who had left Skane. His journey had not just been across a forgotten landscape, but through the terrain of his own soul. He had learned the truth of his world's history and the true measure of his own worth. He had grown. He looked at Alara, whose life had been dedicated to truth, and at Rhys, who had found a cause greater than himself. He thought of the silent clockwork ghosts and the civilization sacrificed for the Sky Dwellers' ambition. He knew he could not perpetuate the mistakes of the past. He made a third choice. His hands moved over the console, not with the frantic energy of the battle, but with the calm, steady precision of a creator. He did not direct the power upwards, towards the sky. He reversed the flow. He performed what the ancient schematics called the Great Release, a function the clockwork ghosts had designed as a final, desperate failsafe. He sent the boundless energy of the Ethereum heart, not to any single island, but back into the planet itself, recharging the vast, dormant geothermal network. "What are you doing?" Rhys asked, his voice rough with confusion. "You're shutting it powered." "I'm not shutting it down," Caelan said, his eyes on the pulsing conduits. "I'm letting it go." The effect would not be immediate. By restoring the planet's natural energy, the artificial etheric fields that held the islands aloft would slowly, gracefully begin to fail. Over the course of generations, the entire archipelago of Ethelgard would descend. They would return to the Foundation, all of them together. It was a choice that would save everyone by forcing them to abandon the world they knew. It would erase the hierarchy of high and low isles, forcing the sun-drenched nobles and the rain-soaked outcasts to build a new world on equal ground. It was a selfless, terrifying, and hopeful choice. This was his resurrection, his return with the elixir. The elixir was not a magical artifact or limitless power. It was a second chance, the new beginning, purchased with the courage to let go of the past. He had healed his own wound, not by gaining the magic he lacked, but by sacrificing the ultimate power for the good of all, proving his worth on his own terms. The journey back to the surface was a strange and silent one. The Ethereum heart was now a quiet giant, its ferocious energy tamed and returned to the earth. In the sky above the Foundation, a change was already visible. The perpetual cloud sea, no longer fed by the chaotic energy of the unbalanced heart, was beginning to thin. For the first time in a millennium, genuine sunlight, pale and tentative, touched the glass deserts. The news of their return and Valerius's demise sent shockwaves through the floating isles. The denouement of their quest was not an ending, but the beginning of a monumental task. The great descent had begun. The isles, starting with the highest, had started their slow, majestic journey back to the ground. There was panic, fear, and uncertainty, but there was also hope. Caelan, the unhued boy from the sinking isle, became a figure of legend. He was no longer an outcast, but a leader, respected not for any magical ability, but for his wisdom and his knowledge of the old ways of mechanics and engineering, which were now more valuable than ever. He worked tirelessly, designing systems to ensure the island's descent was stable and safe, helping to plan the new cities that would rise on the forgotten continent. Rhys, having found a purpose far more valuable than any treasure, became the leader of the Survey Corps. With the Vagrant repaired and refitted, he led expeditions across the vast, newly reawakened continent, scouting locations for new settlements and rediscovering the wonders of a world his people had never known. His cynicism had been burned away, replaced by a rugged, adventurous spirit. Alara was unanimously appointed head of the new Provisional Council, a body made up of representatives from every isle, high and low. Her first act was to unseal the forbidden archives, dedicating the council to creating a new, complete, and honest history of their people.
ensuring the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The crumbling empire of the sky was giving way to a new, rising society on the ground. The future of Ethelgard was uncertain. There would be hardship, conflict, and generations of work ahead as two vastly different cultures learned to live as one. But as Caelan stood on the surface of the foundation, feeling solid ground beneath his feet for the first time, he looked up. He saw the isles, like great green ships sailing slowly down from the heavens. He saw the sky clearing and blue, and for the first time in his life, the world felt not like it was ending, but like it was just beginning. The city of Lumina was dying the slowest of deaths, not by plague or war, but by apathy. A creeping malaise known as the Grey Veil had settled over its once gleaming towers and vibrant plazas, a tangible manifestation of the city's collective despair. It was a fog that did not just obscure light, but consumed it, muting the brilliant mosaics to dull smudges of color, and softening the sharp, hopeful lines of architecture into weary, sagging shapes. The very air felt heavy, as if the sky itself had given up. In the heart of this fading metropolis, within the grand archives, Caelan worked to preserve a history that was literally dissolving. He was a slight man, more comfortable in the company of dust motes and decaying parchment than people. His life was a quiet ritual of cataloguing, mending, and reading. He was an archivist, a keeper of memories, in a city that was forgetting how to feel. Today, the veil felt thicker than ever. Caelan ran a gloved finger over the spine of the Chronicles of the Sunlit Age. The gilded letters were tarnished, the leather cover gray and brittle. He opened it to a chapter describing the construction of the city's central monolith, a massive, humming spire of black, crystalline rock that was said to be the heart of Lumina, the nexus of its unique symbiosis with emotion. The text, once a bold, confident script, was now a faint, watery whisper on the page. In a week, it would be gone. This was Caelan's quiet horror. He wasn't just losing books. He was losing proof. Proof that Lumina had once been a city of laughter so profound it made the stone streets ring, of sorrow so deep it watered the memorial gardens with rain, of hope so bright it made the monolith sing. His primary purpose, his entire identity, was tied to the preservation of this knowledge. Now he was little more than a mortician for memories, watching the soul of his city fade to an illegible blur. He closed the book, the soft puff of dust, smelling of finality. Outside the high arched windows, the grey light of midday looked no different from the dawn. A summons from Elder Maeve was not a request. Caelan found himself standing with the rest of the city's functionaries in the Grand Plaza, before the silent, imposing base of the monolith. The crowd was a sea of grey cloaks and downturned faces, their collective mood a palpable weight that seemed to press down from the sky. Maeve stood on a dais of polished obsidian, a stark figure against the muted backdrop. She had once been a queen of a forgotten land, a leader who had sought refuge in Lumina generations ago, and she still carried the unyielding authority of her past. Her face was a mask of grim determination, her eyes holding the cold light of a star that has seen too much. Citizens of Lumina. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the oppressive silence with the sharp edge of honed steel. The grey veil tightens its grip. Our spirit wanes, our history fades. We have become ghosts in our own homes, haunted by emotions we no longer have the strength to bear. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I have consulted the ancient compacts. I have studied the nature of the monolith. It is a magnificent amplifier, but it is also a merciless mirror. It reflects our despair back upon us, deepening the shadows. There is only one solution, that will grant us peace, one path to stability. A murmur, thin and reedy, passed through the crowd. Kalen felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. "I will perform the ritual of severance," Maeve declared. "We will cut the cord. We will sever Luminous connection to the monolith. The veil will dissipate. Our world will become solid and predictable. We will be safe from the tyranny of feeling." The cost was unspoken, but understood by all. An end to the city's despair would also mean an end to its joy. A world without the crushing weight of sorrow would also be a world without the soaring heights of love. Maeve was offering them a lobotomy of the soul, a permanent, placid numbness. Kalen looked at the faces around him. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a desperate, weary acceptance. They were so tired of hurting that they were willing to forget how to live. The central conflict was not one of armies, but of philosophies. Was a life without pain worth living if it also meant a life without meaning?
That night, sleep offered Kalen no escape. He tossed and turned, Maeve's words echoing in his mind. The thought of a city without deep emotion, without the vibrant history he cherished, was a nightmare. His mind, desperate for an anchor, drifted back to the stories of Lumina's golden age, a time of unbridled hope. He dreamt of an artifact he had only read about, a relic from an era when the city's spirit burned brightest, the Sunstone of Aurea. In his dream, he was not in his small, cluttered room, but in a vast, sun-drenched workshop. Light streamed through high windows, illuminating motes of golden dust. Before him, on a velvet cloth, lay the Sunstone. It was a compass of polished brass and crystal, but instead of a needle, a mote of pure, captured sunlight floating at its center, pulsing with a gentle, reassuring warmth. It was said to glow with the light of collective hope, a beacon against any shadow. In his dream, Kalen reached out, his fingers tracing the intricate engravings, feeling a thrum of optimism that radiated from it. It was the most beautiful, most real thing he had ever seen. He awoke with a gasp, the gray light of another dawn filtering through his window. His heart was pounding. The dream had been so vivid, so powerful. He sat up, his hand falling to the rough blanket beside him. His fingers brushed against something cool, smooth, and metallic. Kalen froze. He looked down. Lying on his bed, inert and cold in the dim light, was the Sunstone of Aurea. It was not a dream-faded memory, but a solid, tangible object, its brass casing cool to the touch, its crystal face dark and lifeless. He had dreamt of it, and now it was here. This was the moment that would unravel his quiet, ordered life, the inciting incident he never asked for. He was holding an impossibility in his hands. Bewilderment gave way to a frantic, scholarly need for answers. Kalen dressed quickly, the Sunstone heavy in his satchel, and hurried to the archives. If he could find the original texts, the descriptions of the Sunstone's creation and purpose, perhaps he could understand what had happened. He went straight to the section on pre-monolith artifice, his fingers tracing the familiar spines. He pulled out the heavy tome, Wonders of the First Dawn, and flipped to the chapter on the Orion artifacts. He found the entry for the Sunstone, and his blood ran cold. The page was blank. Not just faded, but utterly, unnaturally blank, as if the ink had been surgically removed from the very fibers of the parchment. He checked another reference, and another. Everywhere the Sunstone of Aurea should have been mentioned, there was only empty space. The historical record was gone. A chilling realization washed over him. The memory wasn't just gone from the books. He tried to recall the details he had read just days ago, the name of its creator, the year it was forged, and found nothing. The knowledge was gone from his own mind. The only reason he knew what he was holding was because he had dreamed it into existence. This was the cost of his unintentional magic. To bring an object of memory into the world, he had to erase it from history. The floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, clutching his satchel. A woman stood in the aisle.
her movements fluid and silent. She had sharp eyes, a cynical twist to her lips, and the worn leather gear of someone who lived on the city's frayed edges. "That's a heavy bag for an archivist," she said, her voice a low purr. "Carrying more than just books today?" Before Kaelin could react, she lunged. Her speed was startling. She snatched the satchel, but Kaelin, driven by a surge of panic possession, held on tight. The bag tore, and the sunstone tumbled out, clattering onto the stone floor. The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of greed in their decks. Well, what have we here?" It's nothing," Kaelin stammered, scrambling to retrieve it. "It's a priceless antique is what it is," she said, her foot pinning it to the floor. "My name is Alara, and I believe you found something of mine." She was a classic scoundrel, a rogue driven by opportunity. Desperate, Kaelin blurted out the truth. "You can't take it. I dreamt it. I made it real, and now the memory of it is gone. From everywhere. From everything." Alara's opportunistic smirk faltered, replaced by a look of sharp, calculating curiosity. She slowly lifted her foot. "You dreamt it, you say? Show me."
Preparations for the ritual of severance proceeded with grim efficiency. Maeve's enforcers, the Silent Guard, moved through the city like gray specters. They were an order sworn to the Elder, their own emotions seemingly dampened by discipline and strange, sigil-etched collars. They erected pylons of dark metal around the monolith, their movements precise and devoid of hesitation. They were the living embodiment of Maeve's philosophy, a preview of the city's future. The mood in the streets was a volatile mix of fear and relief. The gray veil had become a suffocating blanket, and for many, Maeve's promise of a stable, painless existence was a siren song. They saw the Silent Guard not as oppressors, but as surgeons, preparing for a necessary operation. Food was scarce, hope was scarcer, and the promise of an end to suffering, at any cost, was gaining traction. Alara saw this growing unrest not as a tragedy, but as an angle. She led Kaelin through the winding back alleys of the Undercroft, a part of the city the veil had almost completely consumed. Here the despair was a thick, choking stew. "Look at them," she whispered, gesturing to a crowd huddled around a meager fire. "They're desperate. Maeve offers them an end to pain. What do you offer them?" I don't know," Kaelin admitted, clutching the inert sunstone in his pocket. "I offer them the past, a history they can't even remember." "History doesn't fill bellies," Alara said, her tone sharp and pragmatic. "You have a gift, Archivist. A strange, costly gift, but a gift nonetheless. Maeve is winning their minds with logic. You need to win their hearts with a miracle." Kaelin recoiled at the thought. "Use this power after what it cost me? I erased a piece of our history." "You created a priceless artifact from thin air," she countered. "Stop thinking like a librarian and start thinking like a leader. If you can make things from dreams, you can give these people something Maeve can't. Hope, and with hope comes power." Her words were cynical, but they held a spark of undeniable truth. To fight Maeve, he couldn't just argue with her. He had to offer a better alternative. Driven by Alara's relentless pragmatism, Kaelin agreed to search for answers, but on his own terms. If he was to use this power, he had to understand it. They descended into the lowest levels of the archives, the forbidden vaults, where the most volatile and damaged records were kept under lock and key. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and forgotten magic. Here, the veil's effects were even more pronounced. Entire shelves of books were blank, their contents devoured by the creeping apathy. But some fragments remained, protected by ancient preservation wards. Kaelin and Alara spent hours poring over brittle scrolls and half-erased codices, their lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. They found scattered references, tantalizingly incomplete. They learned the name of the ancient magic users, the Oinoroi, the Weavers of Dreams. The text spoke of a time when the Oinoroi could shape reality with their sleeping minds, building castles from slumber and composing symphonies from reverie.
but they also found darker warnings. They pieced together fragments describing a cataclysm known as the Great Unraveling, a past catastrophe that had torn reality asunder. The texts were maddeningly vague, the key passages erased, but they hinted that the unraveling was caused by a powerful Oinoroi losing control, spilling raw, untamed nightmare into the waking world. The warnings spoke of the magic having two parts. Manifestation, the act of pulling something from a dream, was only the first, cruder half. The second, more important half was something called weaving. What that meant, the texts did not say. The history of this world was not just background. It was an active, dangerous mystery waiting to be solved.
The weight of the city's hunger pressed on Caelan. Ilara's words echoed in his mind. History doesn't fill bellies. He looked at the blank pages in the archives, then at the desperate faces in the streets. He had to do something. He had to prove that there was another way, even if it was just a small proof. He decided on what he hoped was a safe manifestation. It wasn't a legendary artifact, just a simple, powerful memory from his own past. He remembered a harvest festival from his childhood, a time before the Veil, when the city was vibrant and the air smelled of baking bread. He remembered the joy, the community, the feeling of a full stomach and a hopeful heart. That night, he focused on that memory, that feeling. He dreamt of tables groaning under the weight of warm, crusty loaves of bread, enough for everyone. He poured all his longing for that simpler, happier time into the dream. When he awoke, the smell of fresh bread filled his small room. Piled on his floor were dozens of perfect golden brown loaves. With Ilara's help, he distributed the bread in the poorest district of the Undercroft. The people wept with gratitude. For a few hours, a flicker of the old lumina returned. They called him the Dream Baker, a bringer of miracles. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. He returned to his quarters late that night, exhausted, but with a sliver of hope in his chest. He had done it. He had used the power for good. He walked over to his desk, where a small framed drawing had sat for 20 years. It was a childish sketch of a smiling sun, a gift from his mother on his 5th birthday. One of his most treasured possessions. He stared at it, and the hope in his chest turned to ice. The drawing was gone. The page was blank. It wasn't just the drawing that had vanished, but the memory itself. He could remember his mother, but the specific moment of her giving him the drawing. The feeling of her hand on his head, the smell of the ink, it was all gone. A hollow ache opened up inside him. He had crossed the threshold, making a conscious choice to use his power. And the price was not academic or historical anymore. It was personal. It was a piece of his own soul. He now understood his true need. It was not just to preserve the past, but to find a way to build a future that didn't require erasing the very memories that made life worth living. The pulse of dream magic, however benevolent its intent, did not go unnoticed. In her chambers at the apex of the monolith, Maeve felt the ripple in the city's psychic fabric. It was faint, uncontrolled, but unmistakable, a signature of an Oneros. Her worst fear was realized. The ancient catastrophic power had not died out. It had resurfaced. The hunt began immediately. The silent guard were dispatched, their impassive faces betraying no emotion. They carried resonance cages, artifacts of twisted silver that hummed in the presence of dream magic. They moved through the city with terrifying purpose, their patrols sweeping through every district, from the high spires to the lowest tunnels of the Undercroft. The city, already tense, was now gripped by paranoia. A story of the miracle wit had spread, but so too had Maeve warnings. A dream baker was now a rogue weaver, a source of instability, a threat to the coming peace of the Severance. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. The silent guard would stop citizens at random,
the resonance cages whining softly as they passed over them. Kaelin and Elara were now fugitives. They abandoned the archives, Elara leading them through a labyrinth of forgotten alleyways and secret passages she named like the back of her hand. The city that had been Kaelin's entire world was now a trap. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant shout sounded like a discovery. The conflict was no longer philosophical. It was a desperate, street-level fight for survival.
The fragmented map from the Forbidden Vaults was their only hope. It pointed to a place beyond Lumina's walls, a place Kaelin had only read about in the most obscure texts, the Isle of Echoes. According to the half-erased notes, it was the site of the last Oniroi city, a place called Aethelberg, which had fallen during the Great Unraveling. To reach it, they had to cross the sea. Their path lay through a notorious channel known as the Haunted Sea Passage, a treacherous strait of water where the winds whispered forgotten sorrows and ghostly fogs could strand a ship for weeks. The journey was a crucible for Kaelin. He had spent his life surrounded by the quiet order of books. Now he was on a rickety fishing skiff, battling churning waves and disorienting mists, entirely dependent on Elara's sharp wits and surprising skill as a sailor. She navigated by the stars when they were visible, and by instinct when they were not. She taught him how to tie knots, how to read the currents, and how to endure the gnawing cold. Forced together by the perilous journey, their relationship began to shift. The cynical rogue and the timid archivist moved from a partnership of convenience to one of grudging respect. Kaelin saw past Elara's abrasive exterior to the fierce competence beneath. Elara, in turn, saw past Kaelin's naivety, the stubborn core of integrity that drove him. They were no longer just allies. They were becoming friends, a classic sidekick dynamic, forging them into a more effective team. The Isle of Echoes rose from the sea like a skeletal hand. As they drew closer, Kaelin saw that the ruins at Ethelberg were not merely crumbled, they were warped. Towers twisted into impossible spirals, streets folded in on themselves, and buildings melted into the landscape like wax. It was a city that had been broken by a nightmare. These were the sunken ruins the legend spoke of. They ventured inland, the air thick with a psychic residue of ancient fear. In the heart of the ruined city, they found a collapsed plaza. As Kaelin stepped into its center, the world shimmered. The ruins dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadow and terror, a psychic echo of the Great Unraveling, a pocket nightmare realm, left behind by the trauma of the city's fall. From the shadows, a creature formed. It was a monster of pure anxiety, a shapeless, multi-limbed thing that fed on fear. It had no physical substance, and Elara's blades passed through it uselessly. It lunged at Kaelin, its touch not wounding his flesh, but his mind, flooding him with his deepest insecurities, the fear of failure, the terror of being alone, the guilt of erasing his own past. He was drowning in it. Desperate, he reached into his dreams, not for an object, but for a feeling. He dreamt of the one time he had felt truly safe as a child, hiding behind his father during a thunderstorm. He manifested that feeling as a shimmering shield of pure protective energy. The shield held, repelling the nightmare creature, but the cost was immediate and devastating. The memory of his father teaching him to read, the pride in his father's eyes, vanished from his mind, leaving another cold, hollow space. He had survived, but he had paid for it with another piece of his heart. And magic wasn't just costly. Its misuse could leave permanent, psychic scars upon the world itself. As they staggered from the plaza, shaken and drained, a figure blocked their path. It was Maeve. She stood alone without her silent guard, her expression one of profound, weary sadness. Elara drew her blades, but Maeve raised a hand, not in aggression, but in surrender. "I knew you would come here," Maeve said, her voice softer than Kaelin had ever heard it. "This was my home." She gestured to the twisted ruins around them. "I was born on this island, My family, the House of Orion, were the last of the Oniroi. My father was the most powerful dreamweaver of his age. He was brilliant and beloved and deeply unstable. Her gaze became distant, lost in a memory a century old. He wanted to build a paradise. He tried to weave a dream of eternal joy into the fabric of Ethelberg. But he could not control his own pride, his own fear of failure. The dream became corrupt. It became a nightmare. The great unraveling, it was not an event. It was my father's screaming mind made real. It consumed everything. My mother, my brothers, our entire civilization swallowed by a tide of living terror. I was the only one to escape. Kaelin stared at her, stunned into silence. Maeve was not just a tyrant seeking control. She was a survivor, a refugee from her own history, a former queen living in a permanent exile of grief. Her crusade against emotion was not born of a lust for power, but from the absolute, soul-deep certainty that it was a force too dangerous to exist. She was a sympathetic antagonist, her motivations rooted in a trauma so profound it had shaped her entire being. She looked at Kaelin, and he saw not an enemy, but a twisted, warning reflection of what he could become. She was the most terrifying kind of mentor, the one who shows you the path by embodying its disastrous end. Maeve's confession hung in the air, heavier than the gray veil over Lumina. It recontextualized everything. Her methods were extreme, her solution monstrous, but her pain was undeniably real. The journey back to Lumina was a silent one. Kaelin's resolve, once a small, defiant flame, had been doused. He saw the nightmare creature on the Isle of Echoes. He saw the twisted ruins of Evelberg. He saw the bottomless grief in Maeve's eyes. He felt the terrifying, untamed power thrumming within him, and he was afraid. Was she right? Was this power an uncontrollable curse, a seed of destruction waiting to bloom? The cost was already unbearable. He had traded precious, irreplaceable memories for a handful of bread and a useless artifact. He had almost been consumed by a psychic remnant of the magic's failure. His internal conflict raged. Was this a gift to be mastered or a poison to be purged? Elara, ever the pragmatist, was unmoved by Maeve's tragic history. "So she's sad," she said bluntly as they guided the skiff through the gray waves. "A lot of people are sad. That doesn't give her the right to lobotomize an entire city. Her past doesn't justify stealing our future." "But what if she's right, Elara?" Kaelin asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What if I can't control it? What if I become her father?" "You're not her father," Elara said, her gaze steady. "You're you, and you haven't even tried to truly understand this power yet. You've just been reacting. Fear is a choice, Kaelin. So is hope." Her words were a small, sharp stone dropped into the turbulent waters of his doubt. He didn't have an answer, but for the first time, he realized the question itself was a choice. When they arrived back in Lumina, they found the city on the brink. The gray veil had advanced with alarming speed in their absence, choking the upper districts and turning the sky into a permanent, featureless gray. Maeve had announced that the ritual of severance would take place in 2 days that dawn. The city was succumbing, and public support for Maeve was now nearly absolute. Desperation settled over Kaelin. He had to do something, not just to stop Maeve, but to prove to himself that Elara was right, that there was another way. He needed to make a statement, a grand gesture of hope that would push back the veil and show the people of Lumina what they would be sacrificing. It was a desperate gambit, born of fear and a flickering ember of defiance. He would attempt his largest, most ambitious manifestation yet. He would not create something small and practical like bread. He would create a place of pure, unadulterated wonder. He would dream of a stargazing grove, a sanctuary of ancient trees whose leaves shimmered with the light of captured stars, a place where the air was filled with the quiet music of the cosmos. He would manifest it in the city's decaying heart, a beacon of hope against the encroaching despair. This was the midpoint of his journey. a dramatic, proactive swing that would change everything. He would either prove that magic could be a force for creation and beauty, or he would prove Maeve right, one and for all. With Ilara standing guard, Caelan found a secluded rooftop, closed his eyes, and poured every ounce of his hope, his love for the city's forgotten beauty, into a single, magnificent dream. For a breathtaking moment, it worked. A shimmering, ethereal light bloomed in the center of the city. The stargazing grove began to take shape, its trees of silver bark and star-dusted leaves rising from the gray flagstones. A collective gasp went through the city as people saw the impossible sight. The gray veil seemed to thin, to pull back from the radiant light. Hope, real and tangible, flickered in thousands of hearts. But the manifestation was too large, the emotion too raw and untamed. Caelan, in his desperation, was not guiding the magic. He was simply a conduit for a tidal wave of feeling. He felt a sickening lurch as he lost his grip. The dream, untethered from his control, began to corrupt. The beautiful starlit trees twisted, their silver bark charring to black, their leafy canopies writhing into masses of grasping shadows. The gentle music of the cosmos warped into a cacophony of whispers and shrieks. The stargazing globe became a shadowy forest, a place of primal fear torn directly from the subconscious. Then, the fabric of reality tore. A rift of pure darkness opened in the center of the grove, and from it a creature of living nightmare was born. It was the physical embodiment of the city's deepest anxieties, a hulking beast of shadow and despair. The dream had spilled into the waking world, a catastrophic failure that dwarfed the psychic echo on the Isle of Echoes. The creature roared, a sound that was not a sound, but a wave of pure terror that washed over the city, extinguishing the flicker of hope and plunging Lumina into a new, more active kind of darkness. The city's reaction was immediate and absolute. Caelan was no longer the flawed dream baker. He was a monster, the architect of their new terror. The nightmare creature, a physical manifestation of their collective fears, stalked the streets, and the gray veil, fed by this new wave of panic, descended with renewed, suffocating force. He had not saved them. He had damned them. The weight of his failure was absolute. Maeve's warnings, her tragic history, her grim certainty, it all crashed down on him. She had been right all along. This power was a curse. Racked with a guilt so profound it felt like a physical illness, Caelan fled. He ran until the sounds of the city were a distant memory, hiding in the crumbling, forgotten outskirts. He renounced his magic, vowing never to dream again, let alone try to shape reality with his broken, dangerous mind. Even Ilara's faith was shattered. She found him huddled in a ruined watchtower, a broken man. "I believed in you," she said, her voice raw with betrayal. "I told you to give them hope. You gave them a monster." She didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked away, leaving him utterly alone. This was his lowest point, the dark night of his soul. He was defeated, not by Maeve, but by the catastrophic consequences of his own power. He had lost his city, his only friend, and all faith in himself. In the oppressive gray silence, Caelan curled into a ball and wished for the sweet, emotionless peace of Nate's severance. While Caelan languished in despair, Ilara found she could not simply walk away. Her anger was real, but beneath it was a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She was a survivor, and survivors didn't quit. She returned to the one place that might still hold an answer: the Grand Archives. She was no scholar. The faded texts and complex histories were a foreign language to her, but she was persistent. She didn't look for meaning. She looked for anomalies, for things that were out of place. For days, she searched the forbidden vaults, retracing their steps, driven by a sliver of rope she herself didn't understand. Her search led her back to a heavily damaged codex
on Oneroi theory, one Kaelin had dismissed as too fragmented. As she ran her fingers over the brittle cover, she felt a slight unevenness, a hidden compartment. With the delicate skill of a practiced thief, she worked her knife into the seam and pried it open. Inside was not a treasure map or a hidden jewel, but a single, perfectly preserved page. It had been shielded from the veil by the compartment's wards. The script was elegant and precise, and the words on it changed everything. The novice Biviuski pulls a thing from the dream. He is a thief, and his theft leaves a hole in the tapestry of what was. The master knows he does not pull. He weaves. He uses the threads of what is, the waking world, and the threads of what could be, the dream world, and binds them with the thread of what he feels. To manifest without weaving is to unravel. To weave is to create without destroying. The emotion is not the fuel. It is the needle. This was the key. The magic wasn't inherently destructive. The cost Kaelin had been paying, the memory erasure, was not a fundamental rule of magic, but a consequence of using it crudely, of tearing a piece from the whole instead of integrating it.
Ilara found Kaelin in the same ruined tower, a gaunt shadow of the man he had been. He barely looked up as she approached. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt and placed the preserved page in his hands. He read the words, his eyes slowly widening. He read them again, and a profound, shattering realization washed over him. He had been using the power like a hammer, trying to smash hope into reality. He was meant to use it like a needle, carefully stitching the possible into the actual. His mistake wasn't that he had felt too much. It was that he hadn't understood how to use that feeling with precision and control. It was his eureka moment, a spark of understanding that cut through the fog of his guilt. The cost wasn't inevitable. The spill wasn't a certainty. They were the results of ignorance. He looked up at Ilara, and for the first time in days, there was light in his eyes. "I was a thief," he whispered, clutching the page. "I need to learn how to be a weaver." His purpose, which had been shattered, now reformed, stronger and clearer than before. He was no longer a victim of his power, but its potential master. This was the insight that would carry him into the final act, a renewed strength born not of arrogance, but of true understanding. Their reconciliation was quiet, a shared glance that spoke more than words. They returned to the edge of the city to find it in a state of martial law. The nightmare creature still roamed the shadowed streets, and the silent guard were everywhere, preparing the populace for the final ritual. Maeve's voice echoed from speakers placed throughout the city, calm and resolute. The instability is a symptom of the disease. The creature is the final, fevered dream of a dying world. At dawn, we will bring the fever to an end. At dawn, we will have peace. The ritual was happening. The city was ready to surrender its soul. Kaelin knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight Maeve with force. That would only prove her point. He couldn't simply undo the spill. His control wasn't strong enough yet. He had to stop the ritual and heal the rift he had created, to show them a world of balanced emotion, not a world with none at all. His purpose was clear, with Ilara at his side, the cynical rogue who had found a cause worth fighting for. Kaelin began the race to the monolith. The future of Lumina would be decided at dawn. The path to the monolith was a fortress. The silent guard stood in disciplined ranks, their resonance cages creating invisible walls of psychic static. A direct assault was impossible. But Kaelin was no longer the clumsy novice who manifested bread. He was beginning to think like a weaver. He reached into the dream world. But this time, he didn't pull, he wove. He found a fleeting dream of the nightmare creature from a sleeping citizen and wove its likeness into a shimmering illusion, sending the phantom roaring down a side street. As the guard turned to face the decoy, Kaylin and Alara slipped through the gap in their lines. This was not the costly, reality-altering magic, Yen, but a delicate, controlled application of illusion, powered by focus instead of raw desire. They faced a chasm where a bridge had collapsed. Kaylin closed his eyes, recalling a dream of a sturdy stone arch from an old history book. He didn't manifest the entire bridge. He simply wove threads of dream stuff and reality together, creating a solid, shimmering pathway just long enough for them to cross. It held for a moment, then dissipated, leaving no trace and costing him nothing but a moment of concentration. He was demonstrating his growth, his newfound finesse. He was using the magic with the precision of a scalpel, not the blunt force of a hammer. They reached the monolith's core just as the first rays of dawn struck the city. The chamber was a vast, cavernous space, dominated by a towering, multifaceted crystal spire that pulsed with a sickening gray light. This was the heart of Lumina, the nexus of all emotion. Maeve stood at the base of the spire, her hands raised, chanting in a long-forgotten tongue. The air crackled with energy, and Kaylin could feel the world's connection to its own heart beginning to fray. The pylons erected by the silent guard glowed, channeling the city's remaining emotional energy into the spire, preparing for the final severing blow. The ritual was moments from completion. Kaylin and Alara burst into the chamber, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them. Maeve did not turn. "You are too late, child," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "The fever is about to break." The final confrontation was not a clash of swords or spells, but a battle of wills fought on the psychic landscape of the monolith itself. As Kaylin approached, Maeve turned the full force of the ritual's energy upon him. But she didn't attack his body. She attacked his soul. The crystal walls of the chamber became a living mirror of his deepest fears. He saw the accusing faces of the citizens of Lumina, their eyes filled with the terror he had unleashed. He saw the blank page where his mother's drawing had been, a symbol of all the memories he had carelessly destroyed. He heard his father's voice, not with pride, but with disappointment, echoing the failures of his life. This was Maeve's final, desperate argument. That emotion was a weapon, that memory was pain, that love was a vulnerability. She was trying to force him to react with fear, anger, or despair. If he did, his control would shatter. He would cause another more devastating spill, and he would prove her right beyond any doubt. The fate of the city rested on his ability to master his own heart in the face of his greatest pains. Kaylin staggered under the psychic assault, the weight of his guilt and fear threatening to overwhelm him. He could feel the chaotic power of the dream world churning within him, begging to be unleashed in a torrent of defensive rage. But he held back. He looked at Maeve, at the centuries of pain etched onto her face, and he understood. To fight her with her own weapons, fear and power, was to lose. He did something no one, least of all Maeve, could have expected. He stopped defending. He opened himself up, not to his own dreams, but to hers. He pushed past the walls of anger and discipline she had built around her heart for 100 years. He searched for the one memory she had buried deepest, the one she could never bring herself to face because it hurt too much. He found it. A perfect, sun-drenched moment on the shores of the Isle of Echoes. A young Maeve, her face bright with laughter. Her mother weaving a crown of seashells into her hair. Her father, not as a monster of uncontrolled power, but as a man, smiling at his family with pure, unadulterated love. With all the control he now possessed, Kaylin took that fragile, precious memory and he wove it into reality. Not as an illusion, not as an attack, but as a gift. The gray crystalline chamber filled with the scent of salt and sun, the sound of gentle waves, and the warm golden light of a love that had been lost, but never truly forgotten. This was the culmination of his journey, using his power
not for creation or destruction, but for empathy and healing. Confronted with the tangible, beautiful, heartbreaking reality of the very joy she had dedicated her life to destroying, Maeve's iron resolve shattered. The image of her laughing family, so real she could almost touch them, broke through a century of grief and anger. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, the first she had shed since she was a child. The incantation faltered. Her hands dropped to her sides. The ritual, starved of her will, began to collapse. As the memory of her family filled the chamber, it washed over the city. A nightmare creature, the beast born of fear, paused in its rampage. It looked toward the monolith, and the pure, loving emotion of the woven memory began to soothe its rage. It was a creature of despair, and it could not withstand such a profound wave of love. It began to dissolve, not in violence, but in peace, fading back into the dream from which it had been torn. Maeve fell to her knees, the anger that had been her shield for so long finally giving way to a flood of pure, cleansing grief. She was defeated, not by power, but by a simple, powerful act of understanding. The war for Umana's soul was over.
With Maeve's resistance gone, the ritual's energy spiraled without a guide. The monolith shuddered, threatening to crack under the strain. Caelan knew he had only moments. He stepped forward, placing his hands on the cool surface of the crystal spire. Guided by the knowledge from the preserved page and a lifetime of understanding he had glimpsed in Maeve's mind, he began to weave. He did not sever the connection to the city's heart, nor did he leave it wild and untamed. With a delicate, focused touch, he wove new pathways within the monolith's matrix. He created filters of resilience, channels of understanding, and buffers of compassion. He retuned the city's soul, creating a new balance that would allow emotion to flow without overwhelming reality. He was not a destroyer or a creator, but a curator, a guardian of the delicate symphony of feeling. As he worked, a change swept over Lumina. The oppressive gray veil did not vanish in an instant, but began to recede like a morning mist. Genuine color, vibrant and true, seeped back into the world. The sky shifted from a flat gray to a soft, hopeful blue. The muted mosaics on the city walls began to gleam with their original brilliant hues. A new dawn, both literal and metaphorical, had come to Lumina. This was the world's resurrection, a boon brought back by a hero who had completed his transformation. In the weeks that followed, Lumina slowly began to heal. Laughter, quiet and tentative at first, returned to the streets. People began to rebuild, not just their homes, but their connections to one another. The world was not perfect, but it was alive again. Caelan, the quiet archivist, accepted his new role. He was the first of a new order of dreamweavers, tasked with maintaining the balance he had forged. He was no longer just a keeper of past memories, but a guardian of future dreams. Maeve, stripped of her authority, but possessing an unmatched understanding of the magic's dangers, did not flee. She chose to stay. In an act of profound redemption, she offered to become Caelan's mentor, to teach him all she knew of the Oniroy's power and their follies, to ensure the mistakes of the past were never repeated. And Ilara, the cynical rogue who had started this journey for a piece of treasure, remained by Caelan's side. She had found something far more valuable: a cause, a home, and a friend. She was his anchor to the real world, his sharp-witted counsel, the one who would always remind him that even the most powerful weaver needed someone to watch his back. The future of Lumina was uncertain. The scars of the veil remained, and the path ahead would be long. But as Caelan stood with Maeve and Ilara on the balcony of the Grand Archives, watching the first true sunset the city had seen in a generation paint the sky with colors of fire and hope, he knew they would face it together. For the first time in a long, long time, this city was not just surviving. It was dreaming of tomorrow.